What's up, everybody? John Laster here with Laster Law and the Manual Save podcast, joined by Justin Connors of 8 Prime Esports and Mel Kirk of Zen Studios.
Hello, how you guys doing?
Doing well.
Great.
Thanks again for joining us, Mel. I'm excited because I think you're probably one of the people in the video game industry I've probably actually known the longest because it goes back pretty far. Because I was always covering indie games, and I know back in your previous life, you were, pitching me a lot of different titles back in the day.
Yeah, I was trying to think back to what year that was. I was started, I think, in 2004 in the industry, and then I would have been pitching games, all sorts of stuff to journalists around that time.
Yeah.
So,
No, so for people who don't know, can you tell us a little bit about how you kind of got started in the game industry?
yeah, well, I grew up playing games. Nintendo NES was my system. Used to run over to friends' houses. I didn't have them myself, but my friends had them, and we would play Ghosts and Goblins all night long, and Duck Hunt and Excite Bike and all that. And then got a PlayStation. Fell in love with Final Fantasy VII, original Tomb Raider. Colony Wars, it was my jam. Got into college, spent almost, way too much time playing games. At that point, Madden was a huge thing. NBA Street, we were playing all the sports games. Not going to class, and I just said, you know what? If I could figure out a way to get into this industry, this is going to be the best. This is going to be my best life. So I got through school. I came home to a very small town where I grew up in. Some guy had just moved from the Bay Area, to our area. It was east of San Francisco Bay Area, and was doing an agency for video game developers and publishers, just pitching them marketing strategy and publish PR support, things like that. And so I went there and found my way into an internship. I think I knocked on the door 60 times before they let me in. They hired me as an intern, and my job was to basically help publishers do whatever they needed to do to get a title out. And anyway, that was my way into the industry, was just a lot of door knocking, a lot of prying, of course, a passion for games. But there was really no other choice for me. I wasn't going to do anything else. So,
Were you in college for something game related?
I went for business and marketing. Okay. I mean, there were no game programs back in.
They didn't know if
2000s.
Programming or art or anything was your thing. So business though has always been, you've been there from the beginning. That's been a thing. So.
Business, marketing, and psychology. That's been my.
Yeah, it all goes around.
See, for me, I was always kind of the economics and business side because I just want to know how money flows. Because if you understand how money flows and the psychology of how money flows back and forth, it kind of really goes into everything strategically. And that's where I went to school, because I was just I knew I wanted to work in games, but back then, I had no idea how that path would evolve, And I was writing about them at the time, and I think I was covering probably Rock Band. I think that was the title. I think I remember you were on first when I was doing some of this stuff, and it's just always a good time getting to go out to E3 and meet people,
Yeah, for sure, and that was a really fun time. So I started with In the Groove. That was the very first game I got to work on, which was a Red Octane title. It was like a DDR clone, but that led us to Guitar Hero, and Guitar Hero led us to Rock Band, and those fun times when gaming was really breaking out to become a mass market thing. I think Guitar Hero played a big role in that. And down in the doldrums of Kensha Hall was, Guitar Hero, and Miller from Game Informer comes in and breaks a story. Next thing we know, we're all rock stars, and that was funny. But those were fun times. I remember hauling equipment around, plastic guitars and drums through airports, and security agents asking me what are you doing with all this stuff? Are the looking at it it was all suspicious, and good times.
Yeah, I think the hardest one I ever had to explain was, I think Ubisoft gave me a guillotine one time. It was back with Assassin's Creed Unity or something. Oh. And it was trying to get that through airport security. I think I actually mailed it ahead of time because I just knew it was going to be a disaster. But people still looked weird when I was showing them at the post office and stuff.
Yeah.
So what is something that you said in the beginning you were doing whatever you could to get a title published? What's a mistake that you'd learned early, or a big lesson learned in the beginning that you were I didn't know that was going to be like this when you were getting game published?
Well, it was interesting because when I'm working at an agency and I'm working on behalf of somebody else's game, right? And maybe they, you know, something went wrong with ESRB, so the rating isn't coming in on time. And back then everything was packaged, right? So your lead times and your timelines and your supply chain were totally different. It wasn't a digital release. And so, I found that managing a physical good, which happened to be software, and then all the different pieces that add up to like allow the product to release, you really got to have a good solid plan in place and not just wing it. And back in those days, a lot of publishers were winging it, and developers, it was a lot different then. Developers were really at the end of the food chain. So all the money, like it'd be so like, and a lot of times they didn't get advances or anything. So I just learned that publishers were unorganized, but they knew how to do marketing. And even then, like the developers got stuck with all the crap, and like they were still trying to get their game out, and hopefully it was going to be successful. And the publisher is over here doing something that the developer doesn't realize. And so I kind of got both sides of it, but just really the organization was the number one thing I learned early on, was have a spreadsheet and like a checklist. You'd be surprised at how things were done back then. It was really chaos. It's still somewhat chaos in game development, but yeah, that was one key thing.
That's awesome. So then I know you started working with Zen Studios down the road there. And what exactly were you working on when you started there? Because I know your title now is COO, right? So you've kind of transitioned your way up. Yeah.
Chief Poop Scooper. Yeah. When I started at Zen, I believe I came on to run marketing, PR, communications, community, all those functions. But I was a one-man show, and I was just covering all that. I took all the knowledge I learned at Reverb. My first stop. I was there for 6 years. Went to Zen, and we were just coming off the success of Pinball FX on Xbox Live Arcade. It was Zen's first title. It was a huge hit, number one on Xbox Live Arcade for a long time, and then I came in full time right when we were getting into like FX2 and the whole planning and the strategic plan for the product and all that stuff. So came in as marketing, but very quickly found myself doing a similar role at Reverb, where you would just end up doing everything for a publisher because they didn't realize what they needed to do. So
you're saying it was almost one of those things where even though you're marketing and communications, you still end up kind of doing a lot of the stuff that a publisher typically would handle, which is all the random, making sure that checklists are turned in for cert and stuff like that, and helping organization.
Yeah, I mean, to define a publisher is technically, if you push a button and you launch a product, you've published something. But there's so many functions to like make sure people know about the game, coordinating with first parties, business deals that go on, licensing in our case, which we have a heavy amount of licensing. Making sure that the the strategy of the product itself is correct and sound. A lot of times when you get in development, you just have your head down and you're working on something and you're so close to it, you don't like see a big picture. So just trying to have grand vision and set the company could be successful, and that we're not just going to be a one hit and done sort of thing. Just setting all that in motion. Like I really ended up just building out a business plan and putting a critical infrastructure in place. And these are just things that needed to happen. You're at a small company, an indie studio. Software engineers are not business minded, and you know what I mean. Like they're also not artists, and so just coordinating the whole effort. That's just kind of what I ended up doing.
So you were there before Pinball FX?
I was there. So I helped. I was there when we launched Pinball FX through other means, but then I came full time to Zen in August of 2010, I believe, and then we launched FX in that fall, FX2. Yeah.
I was more saying because like for the emergence of like a new system and all that, to go all the way back to something like pinball is an interesting choice. But obviously, like I think you guys even tapped on this, is nostalgia goes a long way. And I'm always curious as to like, do you go in going, we're just making a pinball game, or is there like market data to go, yeah, I think a pinball game will do well?
Yeah, I could tell you a 20-hour story, but we'll keep it.
Truncated.
We'll keep it a little.
Give us a 10-minute version.
So Hungary and pinball have had a love affair. Historically, just the era in which pinball lived in the country due to circumstances of political situations and Russian occupation. Like, they didn't have Nintendos, they didn't have Ataris, they had pinball machines. And so all the guys at our studio have this deep love and affinity for pinball. They grew up playing it. And so when we looked at, when, you know, Zen decided we're not going to be a work for hire studio anymore, or an engine tech company, we see digital distribution coming, we see the opportunity to make our own game. There was no question. It's like, we're making pinball. You know, that was a choice. And of course, Space Cadet was like hugely popular. You know, that was OEM'd onto Microsoft 95 and maybe in others. And so, and there have been other good pinball games, of course. But at that point in time, nobody was publishing digital pinball games to Xbox Live or PSN. And so we just saw the opportunity to take ownership and lead of that. And since we had a lot of talent and guys who understood the game, it was just a very natural choice. And then we set out on a grand mission to just dominate it and own it. And I mean, basically to this point, that has been an ongoing, my life is, you know, pinball every day. So.
Well, and it's been cool to see how things evolved, because I mean, I believe you guys were one of the first kind of games that you could almost even download for free, if I remember right. And then obviously the tables at the time were, you know, what you could purchase, you know, and that was in itself kind of a game changer back for like Xbox Live Arcade, because that just wasn't a thing, you know?
Yeah, actually, so in the, you know, the pinball game itself looks simple enough. You got a flipper and balls, but everything we built around it was actually very innovative and unique. And we've set a lot of industry trends. John, to your point, we were the first free platform, or the first free game download on any platform. We were the first game with in-app purchasing. We were, what else? We were the first game to introduce this idea of backwards compatibility, carrying your tables from one generation to the next. We've developed some crazy innovative stuff, and you know, I'm proud to have been a part of that. So,
did you have something with the connector, like I remember reading somewhere you something like you implemented like a camera or something like that?
Well, yeah, actually, so Pinball FX was a Microsoft first-party title. This is the original game that launched in 2007, and we were having trouble getting attention. You know, just we didn't know who to talk to, and we were weaseling our way through. And they came out the Xbox Live Vision Cam. You know, and so we made this really funny. I made this video. I put on these Hulk gloves, and I was hitting the ball, boom, 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 boom. We were supporting the hardware, and somebody at Microsoft saw it, and they're like, "Oh, perfect pinball with the Xbox Live Vision Cam. Let's sign that game." So we got a first party deal done. But yeah, that was the original thing.
That's awesome.
That's crazy to think back to. And I mean, it's kind of cool to think of, because you guys are so laser focused on owning pinball, you have the ability to kind of iterate those kind of new features that honestly other games end up using too, you know? And I think one of the coolest things about Pinball FX for me has always been the fact that you guys work with literally some of the best licenses on the planet. You know, to be perfectly honest, I'm a huge fan of Marvel, Star Wars. I think you guys have done, I want to say even like Jurassic Park or something, you know, like some other crazy stuff.
Walking
you know?
Dead. I guess, yeah. Yep. Universal too. I mean, you've pretty much hit all of them. So
there's a lot more to come.
Yeah. So it's interesting with that. You have, you also bring back the nostalgia of that too, because people used to love to go to pinball, you know, places because of not just the game itself, but the style of the game, the license of the game, a Rocky pinball. You know, how my thing is like, how do you go about deciding which ones are going to be what you chase? Do you go for just like biggest market, obviously for Disney, or do you like where does that process start to be like, okay, we're going to start grabbing some licenses?
Well, they've all been strategic decisions, and if you look at our timeline and the way things have worked, you know, it's interesting to look back and see, but you know, pinball and IP have gone together for the history and the life of the game. Whatever you put on that playfield is what's going to specifically target an audience. Our first deal was with Capcom, and we did Street Fighter pinball, and you know, we were trying to get a lot of licenses at that time, but we're a small Hungarian studio. There wasn't exactly a ton of trust, you know. I mean, it's just like, oh yeah, you guys want my IP? Was going to cost this much. It was just astronomical. And somehow we got Capcom to work with us. It was the worst deal of my life, but we had to start somewhere, and we did really well. We created a very high quality product. It was total fan service. We weren't competing or like, you know, cannibalizing sales of other types of genres. And we did a really good job, and that just led us to a few other things. We did like Ninja Gaiden, we did whatever. But then we got to Marvel, and Marvel was a big one, and we released Marvel Pinball in 2010. After that, my life got a lot easier, and the deals got a lot better. Because we created something, and Marvel Pinball was a blockbuster. It did awesome. It charted. It's serious. And for a while, it might still be the highest Metacritic rated game, if that means anything anymore. I don't know, but so we knew Marvel was going to be big because superheroes and Spider-Man and awesome characters. And then the next, and then we had our eye on Star Wars, of course. And then when we continued working on that franchise, we actually just did Star Wars Pinball VR at the end of April. But then we wanted to diversify. So then we wanted dinosaurs. We got Jurassic Park. We wanted our favorite movies, Jaws, E.T., and Back to the Future. So like now we're working on a lot of stuff that's like our own our favorites. So we did some other gaming IPs like with Bethesda, working on Doom and Fallout and Skyrim. That's like just super cool as a gamer, So some of it, it's business decision. It's diversifying, trying to find things that appeal to a large, audience. And then some of it's just us in our fandom going out and working on things.
Do you pre-alpha build these things to the license? Go, here's how we think we'll implement it, or do you show them the success and be like, hey, we like your property, and then reverse engineer how you'll work the property in?
It's kind of different with every licensor we work with. At this point, we don't really have to pitch. I get so many inbound requests. I take it to the guys, and however many hands go up about, because we've done 100 tables or more.
Yeah.
The guys want to work on stuff that they're excited, and we never like reuse assets or reskin a table. They're all from the ground up. Our players would know right away if we just borrowed a design and slapped something else on it. But the licensor, they know that we're going to make a good pinball game. We go through the process. We start with a 1-page document that just outlines the key characters, the 3D, the objects, like the storyline. Every table does have a story, and what we're going to do. And because pinball is a very tight design. You're working in a confined space, and you have so many things, and it has to be high impact. Every aspect of it's got to be awesome. Licensors do a good job of making sure we're focused on the right stuff, the right characters, and then they kind of leave us alone. But we go through the whole, in alpha, a pinball table is terrible in alpha. It's when we get to beta is when the licensor will have fun with it and really be able to see how things have come to life.
That's interesting too, because I saw you have the licenses of like, it's not like the fake versions of the characters. Like you have even like the real actors and the real. Is it all through the exact same license thing? Is that the same process no matter what?
It varies. Sometimes we can get likeness in the master license, but with movies and television, it's always a different story. Music is always separate and a pain to deal with. Music is the most painful part of my job, actually.
Oh wow.
That makes complete sense to me, knowing what I know, because that's always the thing that I feel like people forget is the music industry can be pretty chaotic with licensing, not to mention the fact that you're now dealing with 3 to 4 different versions of rights. You have the performance, you have the actual composition, you have the actual, recording, and then, there's moral rights and all these other things that pop up, especially when you deal with other countries from the U.S.
Do you have
it's confusing.
Do you have like a release calendar, and then you try to like what licenses can we get between these and them? Like how do you guys go about deciding when you release something? And then I guess even the process of from when we get the license to when we can use it, how long does that normally take?
Yeah, it's different with everything. If we're trying to be trending and catch something that's like got a 20th anniversary or a new movie coming out or some big thing, we'll bend over backwards to try to make that happen. It doesn't always work out like that. I remember when we were working on Avengers Chronicles for Marvel, we were trying to release with the Avengers. That was the big table in the pack, and we ended up being 6 months late. Because we were using movie designed assets, and if the belt color changes, we got to change it into the game, and sometimes we're making these changes right up into the very last moment.
Yeah.
So that's pretty difficult. But we have a production roadmap, and I know how many slots we have. Right, we're hiring like crazy right now. We're doubling the size of our pinball team. So as more slots open up, I can open up a bigger pipe and I can fill it with, I have my wish list of IPs that I know is my priority. I have a bit, against the matrix of stuff going on in the world and opportunities. And we try to be very timely and strategic and make sure we're, not too random. I do like to throw in random things out there because players just never see it coming. And I think we have a whole bunch of those in our roadmap right now, which keeps it fun too.
No, that's awesome. And I remember even back in the day myself, I think one time we tweeted something like, this is a pinball table we'd love to see. I think it might have been like Archer or something. And then like all of a sudden the creator immediately tweeted back to us and said, yeah, I want to do that too, And it's just cool to see that kind of interaction, even just within your community and some of these creators,
That's how Archer Pinball was born, was through Twitter. And then, Fox it wasn't too much longer. Devin Radford was at Fox at the time, and he calls me and he's like, hey, I saw this thing on Twitter about Archer Pinball. You want to do that? And I'm like, yeah. And let's do Bob's Burgers and Family Guy and American Dad. And, and then Balls of Glory was born. So
that's just
awesome.
Beyond awesome, Yeah. No, that's super cool to me. And you guys have, evolved beyond just, mobile pinball and console pinball. You guys have started dabbling with VR too now, right?
Yeah, VR is awesome. Not everybody can own a pinball machine, whether they don't have the space or the budget. But in VR, you feel like it's as close as you're going to get if you can't get a real pinball machine. It's really, really cool. Once you play in VR, I think that's where you're going to be playing.
Are there any like kind of struggles or limitations you guys dealt with trying to move it into VR that you weren't expecting?
Yeah, well, I'll just say nothing in VR is easy. It's a challenge every time you go through. I'd say like getting in VR right now it's hitting its stride, but hardware was very segmented, especially on PC. I think PC VR is broken right now. You can go get a $20 device from Walmart, plug it in, and download and have a high-end PC with this really crappy headset, and then try to play Alex. And for you, the experience is terrible. So as a user, you're going to leave a terrible review. That does not help a developer, believe me. But there's no way for us to account for that or control for that on PC. Oculus is awesome. The Quest is great, but upraising assets is a challenge. Full 360 environments are challenging. Mini games, at least for us, with licensed content, because it just goes through a very scrutinized approval process. It's challenging, but it's awesome at the end of the day when it's done. And learning how to properly budget for VR titles is very important. So.
Do you ever think we'll get back? I know the wave of AR kind of is come and gone for most things, but do you think? I keep thinking of like you had like a 3D printed like pinball machine, but you could AR skin on top of it. Was that ever in the conversation at the height of AR, or because I know people like Magic Leap and all them were really trying to figure it out, but like was that a conversation you guys were having?
Yeah, and I think I think it's Tilt 5, Jerry Ellsworth's company, has really cool technology, and I could see where. You could just put on glasses or whatever, and if you have a flat surface in front of you, it could just become a pinball game. I think that's really cool. I do think AR will come back into frame with enterprise type of technology first, and then that'll kind of maybe usher in the gaming era of AR. But I love, it's cool because I get early looks at a lot of different technology because pinball is an easy example to get up and running to demonstrate something, and it's something that everybody understands. So I'm inundated. I got this new technology or this new hardware, there's new this, can you put pinball on it? And I was like, man, the future is going to be really awesome, so yeah, for sure. I think AR is, at some point will be here.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. And a lot of people don't always realize this, but you guys do things beyond just pinball. So how did that process even come about, and what's that been like for the studio?
Yeah, we've always been pinball. Like that's been our main business, and it's allowed us to, live as a studio and sustain. But then we always wanted to have something else going, because we're gamer, And after guys have worked in pinball for a decade, they do want to try something else, So we've done mini golf, we've done crazy kick beat. This game was our own style of kung fu with rhythm matching. beat matching, I should say. We did Castle Storm, which is actually hugely successful, and then that kind of led us into RPGs because also with pinball, our guys go playing pen and papers, and Dungeons and Dragons and all that kind of stuff. So after we got our feet wet with other types of games and got some experience, actually shipped products, we started going for something bigger, And Operencia is probably the best example of our successful RPG to date. Just it's a 30-hour game, an ode to old school dungeon crawlers, all based on Central European folk tales. It's beautiful. It's beautifully written, awesome soundtrack, and all of the guys who worked in that game actually came out of pinball, and we learned something about. I mentioned earlier about really tight, small, like designing small, putting a lot into a small space. And a dungeon crawler was a great example of how you see that executed on a larger scale. So it really fit into like our profile as far as what are we good at, and we built into the RPG space. I'm really excited about what we have in the pipeline for RPGs. It's also another reason why we were acquired actually at the end of November of last year by Embracer, because we showed them what's next from our RPG side, and I think that was really one of the big got them excited. And that's so now when I talk about Zen, I say we are pinball and we are RPG.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know Embracer went on a pretty massive acquisition spree, if I remember right. And I'm sure you can't comment too much on any of that, but that was cool to see. Hopefully it leads to more awesome stuff for you guys.
Yeah, we were an indie for I don't know how many years, indie publisher developer for call it 13. Not a lot of guys survive that long. Not a lot of companies. Sorry about the term guy. I should say companies survive that long. But it's nice to now have. I think they saw our plan and they're excited, but they're just empowering us to do it, and that's great. Our identity is not changing. They're not telling us what to do. It's just like, here you go. Here's resources and tools and help and things that you were missing to like really, fill in the gaps, and off we go. It's really cool.
Oh, that's awesome.
There he goes again. This happens sometimes on this podcast. John's computer just crashes. Is there any? I like the idea of you getting into the RPG. Is there anything you're seeing in RPGs now that you guys are trying to do differently, or like what? Can I get to like where's your focus on with the RPGs?
I'd say our focus is we're trying to make games that we want to play.
Yeah,
and we love to modernize nostalgia. That's evidenced with pinball, which we've modernized, and with dungeon crawlers. Operencia was a modernized dungeon crawler. And we love single player campaigns. Like that's still the game, at least my generation and older. And now that I don't have as much time to play, I like a 10 to 12 hour experience that's very high polished, really quality, really well done, and not a lot of fluff. I think that's the space we're living in. Who knows? It could grow into something bigger. Operencia was a big game. It's 30 hours. We just see from data how many people actually finish the game. It's sad to see, but not a lot. But we see a lot of people dropping off around 12 to 15 hours. It's kind of confirmed our suspicion, or my suspicion anyway. So I think that we're going to live in that really, really high end 10 to 12 hour sort of space. We love high fantasy. We love like anything that's like from Magic the Gathering kind of stuff to Dungeons and Dragons kind of stuff to some of our favorite book series, Brandon Sanderson and all the sci-fi. So we love all that.
Do you think there's a space for the thing that I think that like somebody, because you're doing licensing so well, so like is there going to be a space, and if I'm touching on an idea, I apologize, but like where an RPG can have a multi-license in it? So like you're working with licenses so much, like we haven't seen that yet, like what Fortnite does with all their different skins. Do you think RPGs will ever have that kind of multi-license world?
It's possible. Yeah. I think you'll see a licensed RPG from Zen at some point.
No, that's fantastic.
And, who knows, maybe we can also make a pinball game at the same time and kind of cross-promote them.
That'd be dope.
That would be pretty crazy. To make a pinball game from one of your other IPs is probably just like going full meta at that point,
Yeah, well, we've done it with our own. Castle Storm has a pinball table, which is really great. And when we launched that, we saw sales of Castle Storm go up, and it was really cool. And then vice versa. So,
no, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So one thing I was going to ask a little bit about is like Zen Studios, obviously you mentioned it earlier, is over in Hungary. You're in California. So I'm assuming you guys have always had to deal a little bit with working virtually because of that, you know? So do you think that helped you when things started heading toward COVID? Like how have you guys been about, working from home and stuff like that?
Yeah, well, we have three people here in the States,
Hmm.
and all of us have worked from home for the duration of working for Zen. So it was no change for us. However, I did need to build myself out a man cave because my little office was just too confining. I mean, I'm traveling all over the world and bouncing around pre-COVID, and it's okay to be in a small office, but if I'm here day in day out, I needed like some extra space. For me, that was important, and also just I'm a very social person, so missing the human interaction has been difficult, but that's probably the hardest challenge. As far as the studio goes, yes, we've seen some delays. It's not nearly as bad as we all thought it was going to be,
Hmm.
but the creative aspect is hard when you're in a room with people and you got a whiteboard and you're just jamming and like the ideas are flowing. That is also missing right now.
Hmm.
It's you can talk like this on Zoom, but there's just something about an in-person energy. And but the studio and all of our projects, for the most part, we haven't had any significant impacts.
That's been probably the most common thing I'm told is you miss that like feeling of serendipity that can happen when you're just walking down a hall and it's like either, I had this idea, what do you think about it? Or, can you help me solve this problem? And then suddenly you end up creating something new,
Hmm.
and it's just very difficult to replicate that without being in person, There's just something super different about having to schedule a time, put it on a calendar, and be like, we're going to be on a Zoom call for this at this time.
Yeah, you're right. And I mean, and Zoom fatigue feels real at this point. There's just sometimes I think we're just on the Zoom and we're like, this just feels terrible. Everyone just turns their cameras off and, wants to be less formal. But yeah, but I mean, I miss stuff like PAX and E3 and, GDC and, whether or not there's like, we go back to those or not. I don't know. I just miss they're big moments for the industry and they're time to see
Mhm.
friends and it's time to, there's just so much that goes on.
Well, and like it just feels like there's people I haven't seen in like 2 years now, that I've seen just about every other year probably since I was 18, and that's
Mhm.
just kind of wild to sit back and be like, um, it just feels like a part of your life. Like I feel like I've gone to E3 just about every year since I could, and it's just like not having that around is just different. And that's not to say that, we don't know where that's necessarily going to ever end up because, even before the pandemic, there was questions about is it still relevant? How does it need to scale? How does it need to change? How does it need to adapt?
Yeah.
But I personally miss those kind of events.
Yeah. For me, it's always just seeing, because being in the industry now for so long, you have work colleagues, but they've also become your friends. And I think people in the game industry, like there's a certain way we operate and our brains work somewhat similarly. And a lot of people don't understand us if you're not in it. And so you find a lot of relief and a lot of help actually when you can be with your peers and you talk about all sorts of things that most people wouldn't understand. So I think this industry, I talk with other friends, studio heads, we're all missing like this sort of thing for sure.
Hmm. No, it makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
So I know we touched on it a little bit earlier, but I don't think we really went into it super in depth. What exactly is a COO? For somebody who's just like, what the heck does that title even mean? Like obviously, I think you called yourself like chief poop scooper.
Yep.
And I mean that makes perfect sense to me. But I think to somebody else, they may have just taken that as some depreciating humor and not really understood what that meant.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, I think the way I can drill it down is I'm the ultimate resource for anybody and everything to make this company function. I have full knowledge of like literally every process at Zen, both on the development side, on the publishing side, on the business relations side, on everything. So if there's need or question or resource or whatever, a problem, a deal, and anything, I'm involved with it.
Hmm.
I do everything except for sign the contract. My CEO he'll sign the contract. I don't. I also don't process finance. I review finance and I
Hmm.
thumbs up or review budget. I assemble it. But so that's I run the company on a day to day. So the CEO can he manages other things, HR things, and uh, big strategic growth plans, which I will give him, and he reviews, and we have now under ownership, there's another layer of approval and whatnot. But I mean, I run the day to day and make sure everything is going as planned.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, I think that's one of those things where, especially, I work with a lot of, young companies and stuff, and they'll say something like, "I'm the CEO" or "I'm this," and I think COO is one of those ones that most people don't necessarily even understand what it does, but it's really interesting to kind of hear you kind of frame it that way, where again, your job is the day to day stuff to make sure that all the big picture strategic slash maybe finance meeting, like investment style acquisition kind of meetings, the CEO can deal with that stuff, and kind of help you guys, not have roadblocks.
Yeah. Well, and Jolt and I, Jolt's our CEO, Jolt Kagoshi. You know, he's a very good business person. He's the first one to tell you he's not a game designer by any means, or he likes games, but that was not his passion. He saw a business opportunity. And so he founded Zen. But he's a very long term thinker, very smart guy. My right hand is Victor Giori, and he's managed pinball production for the last decade. And I can't say, like, it is a team here. The pieces are very strategic, and we have very good people, I believe, placed in the key functions. But this industry changes so fast. You just never know what's going to happen. New technology is always here. Competition is always changing. I mean, just tastes are changing. The way you market tomorrow is not what you're doing today. So, like, it's a crapshoot sometimes, and
Yeah.
you just try to be as prepared as you can and roll with the punches. Be adaptable, flexible, have good people, and so that's also my job, is to help make sure that Zen is fostering an environment in a company that people want to come work at, and that they feel happy and fulfill that, and that they're taken care of. So that's the
Well,
other side of the job.
and that's a nice little segue to kind of like close things up here. Where do you see some interesting, trends in the industry for, whether it's someone wanting to get involved in the industry, or, someone wanting to create their own kind of games and stuff? Where do you see needs and holes, not even necessarily speaking within Zen, but, just in
Mhm.
general?
It's a good question. I think it's definitely harder to get in the industry now than it was a year ago, or certainly 5 or 10 years ago. Um, and I think still coming in like QA or community or something like that is still the entry point, unless you're an artist or uh, a programmer, and you've gone through a program now to like actually hone your skills and do that. But I mean, you used to go to GDC and half of it was students applying
Hmm.
to devs or publishers. But as far as like where the holes are, engineering, programming, I could, if there were 5 programmers right now available to me, I would hire them in an instant. The global demand for programmers and coders is astronomical. I heard Google has 15,000 open engineering positions.
Hmm.
In Apple, they want to hire 30,000 over the next 10 years or something. I mean, so I think that is an area where if you can learn coding, that is such a valuable skill. It's like learning, speaking a second language at this point. My daughters are 10 and 12, and they started in Scratch. They're moving into other forms of coding now. I just think it's like a useful tool. I think if you know basic coding, that's totally a way to get into the industry. Art, animation, that's another. We're usually lacking artists. We love to find good artists. We'll hire in an instant. I am happy to see our focus on diversifying the industry, not just being a bunch of guys. I think women, they offer a whole nother, like, they have different brains than us. So I hope we see a lot more female presence, and that the industry can attract talented women. And
No, that makes sense. And I mean, I think that's the advice I give a lot of people when they ask me is like, if they're saying like, oh, my kid wants to work in games, I'm like, well, if they're willing to learn to program, because the reality is that's the new language that everybody's going to be speaking,
Mhm.
is you need to know some aspects of it. At least get, enough of an understanding that you can be dangerous with it to where you can understand it. And, that helps even if you're in a project manager type role, where you can at least know what people are telling you,
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there any? I guess because you've mentioned different brains and your interest in psychology. Is there anything, any kind of like thing you've learned along the way from marketing to people that you could kind of sum as like, here's some things I think are useful?
Yeah. So the psychology that I learned, my double major, was in consumer behavior, not so much like psychosis. I had to get some of that, but I was really interested in what motivates somebody to do something, and how do you get someone's attention and like keep it. I go back to like Guitar Hero. We wanted to make people feel like rock stars. And that was the ultimate. When you put on the guitar, sell the rock star experience. Most kids, adults even, they hear the music and they maybe have thought of themselves on stage, and a lot of that went into our marketing strategy, and I did the sell-in for the game into to retail, and we were told no, 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 no by every retailer. The box is too big. It's too expensive. No one's going to understand this. And I realized that I was the one doing the demo. I would play the game and they just look at me and I was having fun. We get to our last meeting, and I said, no, you know what? I'm gonna let you play the game. You're gonna feel like the rock star, and that was that was the key. And I realized experience is so important. And that was our first sale, by the way, and that was our only sale when we launched, and it was over after that, like $1 billion later in 12 months. But the experience is what sold it, and so I've held on to that. I learned that very very early. When someone picks up the game for the first time, they've got to feel something. Like they have to, if there's no experience there, cancel the project. If it's not moving you, it's worthless. So there's some psychology, there's some product design involved with that. But that's for me the key thing every time.
Yep. Cool.
That makes a lot of sense, especially when you're trying to figure out what kind of game might be a hit. You can look at charts and analytics for days and be like, okay, if I make a game that's in this specific genre that hits this fidelity level, it should do okay. But like whether or not it actually like speaks to you when you play it's a whole other thing that's really hard to quantify.
Yeah. I think there's always this argument about like what are games exactly? Is it art? Is it art in motion? Is it just a program? Is it just a simulation? It's all those things. They're very complicated. I do, of course I work in the industry, so I'm biased, but I do think that creating a video game is one of the hardest things to create in terms of what someone will consume and hopefully enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot to it.
I would have to assume it's almost like stand-up comedy versus like being in a movie. Like stand-up comedy has to work. Like you can't not work, and you have to work it out until it works. And games, it has to work because the moment you give it to people and it doesn't, it's like, well, you had to work this out until it worked. So that's interesting.
Absolutely. In stand-up comedy, one of the most difficult things to do.
Yeah.
Well, and honestly, I would say that analogy works even more now that we've kind of developed as an industry to where so many things come out in early access now. To the point that it literally is like a guy going to a small club and just trying out the act before the Netflix special.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, I agree.
No, but I just want to say thank you so much for your time, Mel. I really appreciate it. I think this has been awesome.
Yeah.
Is there anything you'd want anyone watching this to know? Anything that you guys are working on specifically right now with Zen?
Well, we're always launching pinball games. That's just kind of an ongoing evergreen thing for us. If you do have VR, I would highly recommend trying out Star Wars Pinball VR. Otherwise, yeah, like I don't know. We're I don't know how to say it, but we're just happy to exist. We try to be Zen, so
It kind of fits with the name. No, I remember. I think it was one year at E3. You guys had what was it, like slippers and a couch, and I was just like, "This is the best E3 booth I've ever been to." Just because at the end of the day, that's what you're looking for. You're just looking for that moment of zen where you can kind of relax and you can kind of just chill, and
Gave
you
you
can
an
kind of like
experience.
let the the weight of the world to go off and just play some pinball or something.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome. All right, awesome. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thanks for having me.